Rain hit the old brownstone in hard, slanting sheets, rattling the narrow windows and drumming against the patched tin awning over the back steps. Clara Bennett was ankle-deep in freezing water, one hand braced against a cellar shelf and the other clutching a flashlight that kept flickering every time she shook it. Around her, cardboard boxes of donated books were swelling at the corners, the ink on handwritten inventory labels bleeding into soft blue bruises. The smell of damp paper and plaster dust filled her lungs. Somewhere above her, thunder cracked so sharply the entire house seemed to flinch. "Miso," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come on, baby." "This isn't funny," a frightened meow answered from somewhere behind the old boiler. Clara pushed deeper into the water, bit back a yelp when something hard struck her shin and swung the flashlight toward the far wall. The basement window had finally given up. Rainwater was pouring through the broken pane in silver ropes, carrying leaves, grit, and street runoff into the room. It had already swallowed the lowest shelves. Another few minutes, and the small first editions she had spent 2 years collecting for the store's anniversary display would be ruined. Her phone was dead. The power had gone out 20 minutes earlier. The emergency plumber had put her on hold twice and then disconnected. Her landlord was useless, which was almost funny considering the landlord had been her aunt, and the building now belonged to Clara because Aunt June had loved her enough to leave her a bookstore, and not enough to leave her a roof that didn't leak. "Miso." The cat hissed from behind the boiler, followed by the metallic clatter of something falling over. Clara lunged, slipped, caught herself on the edge of a rusted workbench, and came up breathing hard, soaked to the skin. Her braid had half come loose and was sticking to the back of her neck. Her oversized college sweatshirt, the one with Bennett books, stitched in faded gold across the front, clung to her arms like wet burlap. She looked at the basement door, then at the window, then at the rising water. She could stay and lose the books, or she could leave for 2 minutes and risk the cat wedging himself somewhere worse. Neither choice felt survivable tonight. Then, she thought of the neighboring house. Everyone on Crescent Lane knew who lived there, even if they pretended not to stare. Roman Vale. Billionaire. Real estate and tech. Old money polished into colder money. The man who had bought the abandoned mansion next door 3 years ago restored it without ever speaking to anyone on the block, and moved through the neighborhood like a rumor in a tailored coat. Delivery drivers lowered their voices at his gate. Contractors stood straighter when his car pulled up. Children dared one another to ring the bell and run. Clara had lived beside him for 12 days. In that time, she had seen him exactly twice. Once through the iron fence, speaking into an earpiece while a black SUV idled at the curb. Once from her bedroom window, standing alone on his third-floor balcony in shirt sleeves, looking out at the city as if he had misplaced something in it years ago and never stopped searching. He had not smiled either time. Another crash sounded from behind the boiler, followed by a long, miserable meow. "Okay," Clara whispered to the dark. "Fine. We're doing this." She splashed up the cellar stairs, shoved through the kitchen, and ran out the back door into the storm. The alley between the two houses had become a wind tunnel. Rain slapped her face. Her socks soaked through instantly inside her rubber boots. By the time she reached Roman Vale's side entrance, she was shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Light glowed behind frosted glass. He was awake. She pounded once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. She hit the bell and kept her palm there. For one impossible second she considered how insane this looked. A half-drowned bookstore owner banging on a billionaire's door at 2 in the morning because her basement was flooding and her cat had terrible survival instincts. If Aunt June could see her now, she would either laugh until she cried or tell Clara this was exactly why you always keep cash, candles, and a crowbar in the house. Locks turned on the other side. The door opened. Roman Vale filled the frame in a white dress shirt rolled to his forearms and dark trousers that looked absurdly expensive for a man answering a door in the middle of the night. He was taller than Clara remembered, broad-shouldered, all stillness and hard lines. A faint shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. His black hair looked as if he had run a hand through it, one too many times. In the amber light of the hallway, his face was less polished than it appeared in business magazines, and somehow more severe. His eyes dropped to her drenched sweatshirt, bare legs, muddy boots, and rain-slick hair plastered to her cheeks. For a beat, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, much too fast, "I know it's 2 a.m, and I know this is unhinged, and I promise I'm not here to sell cookies or join a cult, but my basement window broke. Half my inventory is floating away. My cat is staging a hostage situation behind the boiler, and if you have either a flashlight that works, a pry bar, or the upper body strength of a morally complicated hero, I really need to borrow all 3. Roman stared at her. Rain blew sideways between them, and then, so briefly she almost thought she imagined it, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile, not even close, but something in his expression cracked. "You came to the right house for only one of those things," he said. His voice was low, roughened by sleep or disuse. Clara couldn't tell which. "Please tell me it's the upper body strength." "It's the flashlight," he said, and stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze. I can't drip on your floor. It looks expensive." "It is expensive." That was not comforting. That ghost of an almost smile appeared again, there and gone. Roman reached behind the door, grabbed a heavy black raincoat from a hook, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. It smelled faintly of cedar, and something darker, clean and unfamiliar. He turned, spoke to someone deeper in the house in a calm voice she couldn't catch, then returned with 2 industrial flashlights, a crowbar, and a pair of waterproof gloves. "Show me." He didn't ask whether she could manage alone. He didn't ask why she had not called someone else. He simply locked the door behind him and followed her back into the rain. What Clara did not know, as they crossed the alley under a sky splitting itself open with light, was that Roman Vale had not opened his door to an unexpected visitor in years. He had built his life around distance, around barriers that shut out need before it had a chance to become loss. But in less than 30 seconds, his soaked and breathless new neighbor had brought chaos straight through every defense he had left, and before the night was over, neither of them would leave that basement unchanged. By the time they reached the bookstore kitchen, water had seeped across the cracked tile floor in a shallow, gleaming sheet. Roman took in the scene with one sweep of his flashlight and one clipped breath. If he was shocked that Clara lived above a store called Bennett Books, with hand-painted shelves and a chalkboard menu hanging beside the back stairs, he did not show it. He only shrugged out of his jacket, set down the crowbar and said, "Where?" "Basement. Watch the 3rd step. It tilts because my aunt believed in character-building home repair." "Your aunt sounds dangerous." "She contained multitudes." He followed her down. The basement looked worse under proper light. Water now lapped at mid-calf. Boxes were dissolving into paper pulp around the edges. The window frame had split cleanly at one corner, and cold rain hammered through the gap. Miso's terrified eyes flashed behind the boiler, then vanished. Roman did not waste time with commentary. He stepped into the water fully clothed, shoved one shelf back from the window, and wedged the crowbar into the warped frame. Muscles tightened beneath his soaked shirt. The wood groaned. Clara waded to the first edition display, pulling the driest volumes she could reach and stacking them on a metal cart. Her hands shook from cold and adrenaline. "I know you probably employ entire departments for things like this," she said, lifting a waterlogged carton onto the workbench. "So thank you for not calling security on me." I don't employ people to rescue books at 2 in the morning. You should. It's an underserved market. A sharp crack split the air. Roman yanked the damaged section of frame loose and shoved a rubber mat over the opening as a temporary barrier. Rain still leaked through, but the flood slowed from a torrent to a miserable spill. Better, he said. That was, wow. It's a window, not open heart surgery. Still. Impressive. He turned toward the boiler just as Miso shot out from behind it, launched himself at Clara's shoulder, panicked at the sudden height, and bounded directly onto Roman's chest. Roman made a sound Clara would later remember, with embarrassing fondness, pure startled indignation. The cat clawed upward, using several $100s worth of shirt as a mountaineering surface. Oh my God, Miso. Clara lunged, slipped, and collided with Roman hard enough that they both staggered. He caught her automatically, one hand at her elbow, the other somehow securing the cat before either of them toppled into the water. For half a second they were all tangled together, cold rain, wet cotton, cat hair, laughter trapped in Clara's throat. Roman looked down at the furious orange cat, now glaring from the crook of his arm. Miso sneezed directly on his collar. Clara slapped a hand over her mouth. Roman looked at the cat, then at Clara, then at the torn remains of his shirt, and this time he actually smiled. It transformed him. Not completely. The grief did not vanish. The hardness did not dissolve. But warmth moved through his face like light through dark glass, so unexpected and startling that Clara forgot the water around her legs and the storm over their heads. He looked younger for a second, less like a monument, more like a man. There, Clara said softly, before she could stop herself. That's what the neighborhood's been missing. The smile vanished almost at once, as if he had heard her and regretted giving too much away. I'll survive the cat, he said. That's generous. He's never apologized for anything in his life. Miso, traitor that he was, began purring. Together they moved the remaining boxes to higher shelves, set buckets under the steady leaks, and rolled the metal carts toward the stairs. Roman worked with quiet efficiency. Clara worked with the frantic speed of someone calculating what each ruined book might have paid next month's gas bill. She was too cold to feel her hands by the time the worst of it was done. Roman noticed before she said a word. Upstairs. I still have the poetry section. You're shivering. I can shiver and alphabetize. You can do neither if you collapse. There was no room in his tone for argument. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it made something inside her unclench. Maybe because nobody had sounded that certain on her behalf in a very long time. He herded her upstairs with the flashlight angled low to guide her footing. In the kitchen he found towels without asking where she kept them, which suggested he was the kind of man who opened cupboards only when necessary and remembered everything he saw. He also found the ancient kettle Aunt June had refused to replace and set it on the gas stove. The power is out, Clara said. Gas line still works. So does bossiness, apparently. He shot her a look that would have frozen most people. It barely slowed her down. The kitchen was warmer than the basement, though rain still rattled at the old windows. Clara rubbed her hair with a towel, Roman's coat pooling around her boots. Under the overhead emergency light from the battery lantern, the room looked more worn than cozy. Chipped cabinets. A scarred pine table. The bulletin board crowded with flyers for school reading drives, open mic nights, and free tutoring hours in the store's back room. Roman's gaze lingered there. You run these? He asked. Most of them. The reading club. Resume workshop twice a month. Teen writing nights when I can bribe them with enough sugar. Why? She blinked. Because people need them. That's not what I asked. Clara tucked the towel around her shoulders. Because when my mom got sick, the bookstore kept us afloat. People bought gift cards when they couldn't afford books. Teachers dropped off supplies. Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery next door fed me every Tuesday for 6 months and told me not to argue because grief burns calories. So now, I do what I can. The kettle began to rumble. Roman stood very still. And what can people do for you? The question was so direct it nearly embarrassed her. Tonight? Apparently break my basement window and inspire a personal crisis. He didn't smile this time, but something in his expression softened again. Before Clara could say anything else, a voice drifted from the front of the store. Young. Female. Sleep thick and wary. Uncle Roman? Roman turned at once. A girl stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the darkened hallway, wrapped in a gray throw blanket. 14, maybe 15. Slim. Pale from sleep. Curly dark hair mashed flat on one side. Her eyes moved from Roman to Clara to Roman again. Smart eyes. Defensive eyes. I woke up, and your room was empty, she said. Clara's brows rose before she could stop them. Uncle. Roman's face changed in a subtler way than it had with the smile, but Clara caught it. The rigid distance left his shoulders. Sophie, this is Clara Bennett. Her house flooded. I came to help. Sophie looked at Clara's soaked clothes, then at the flashlight and crowbar by the back door. That sounds more believable than most of the headlines about you. Clara made a startled, choking sound that might have been a laugh. Roman, to her astonishment, did not deny it. She has tea? Sophie asked. It's a bookstore, Clara said. That's one of the legal requirements. Within minutes, the three of them were sitting around the pine kitchen table with chipped mugs and steam rising into the dim room. Miso had claimed Roman's lap with the shamelessness of a born opportunist. Sophie hid a smile behind her tea. Outside, the storm continued to tear at the block, but the center of Clara's night had shifted, without warning. Disaster was still downstairs. The books were still damp. Morning would still bring repair invoices she could not afford. But there was also this: a billionaire in a ruined shirt, a guarded teenage girl wrapped in a blanket, and a kitchen suddenly feeling less lonely than it had in years. What Clara did not know yet was that Sophie Vale had been watching her bookstore from across the alley for days, that Roman had noticed too, and that before dawn broke over Crescent Lane, Clara Bennett's cramped kitchen would become the first place in a very long time where Roman Vale felt something dangerous enough to avoid and irresistible enough to return to anyway. By 6:30 the rain had weakened to a steady hiss. The emergency glaziers Roman called were already measuring the basement window. A cleanup team in dark uniforms had arrived just after dawn, with pumps, plastic sheeting, industrial fans, and the kind of competence that made Clara suspect they dealt in disasters for the very rich. She tried 3 times to argue that she could not pay for any of it. Roman ignored her with impressive concentration. You can send me the invoices, she said while one of the workers carried out a ruined shelving panel. I won't. That isn't how money works. It is when I say it is. That is the most billionaire sentence I've ever heard. They stood in the front of the store while the crew worked below. Morning light filtered through the rain-smeared display windows, catching the dust in the air and turning it silver. Clara had changed into dry jeans and a sweater, though her hair still smelled faintly of stormwater and Roman's cedar coat. Roman looked infuriatingly composed in fresh charcoal wool, as if he had not spent half the night knee-deep in floodwater, holding a hostile cat. Sophie sat cross-legged in the children's corner, with a stack of fantasy novels and a blueberry muffin Clara had found in the freezer. She had loosened visibly in the bookstore, though she still startled at sudden noise. When a worker dropped a toolbox downstairs, her shoulders jumped, and Roman's attention snapped toward her on instinct. Clara saw it. So did Sophie, apparently, because she relaxed a second later and kept reading. Uncle Roman only hovers when he's pretending not to, she informed Clara without looking up. Roman's jaw tightened. Sophie. What? It's true. Clara hid a smile by rearranging a display of used paperbacks. The bell above the front door jingled. Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery next door bustled in carrying 2 foil trays and enough concern to power the block. She stopped dead at the sight of Roman Vale standing beside the register, then recovered with admirable speed. "Ah," she said. "So the rumors are true." "There are rumors?" Clara asked weakly. "My niece saw his car in the alley at 3 in the morning. By 4:30, half the street believed you had either been kidnapped by a handsome criminal or secretly married rich." "Neither," Roman said. Mrs. Alvarez's gaze landed on the rip at the shoulder of his shirt, the one Miso had contributed to earlier before Roman changed. Pity. The story was better the other way. Sophie snorted into her muffin. Mrs. Alvarez set the trays on the counter. "Empanadas. The beef ones are for you, Clara, because you forget to eat when you worry. The spinach ones are for the child, because someone has to provide vitamins. And the extra tray is for the repairman because hungry workers become slow workers." "You're a saint," Clara said, kissing her cheek. "I know." Mrs. Alvarez leaned closer and lowered her voice, though not enough. "Is he as rude as he looks?" Roman answered before Clara could. "Only when necessary." Mrs. Alvarez straightened and considered him. "Good. Then perhaps you can be useful. The city inspector never returns calls when the problem belongs to ordinary people." "I'll have someone here by noon," Roman said. Mrs. Alvarez blinked. "Well, that is useful." Word spread quickly after that. It always did on Crescent Lane. By 11, 3 neighbors had stopped by with extension cords, soup, and speculative expressions they tried and failed to disguise. Clara could feel the entire block recalibrating around the impossible image of Roman Vale carrying wet boxes out of her basement before breakfast. He endured the curiosity with the pained patience of a man being forced through a social ritual he neither understood nor respected. But he did not leave. That fact bothered Clara more than she wanted it to, because men like Roman Vale did not linger in battered independent bookstores on weekdays. Men like Roman Vale sent assistants, lawyers, and charitable donations. They did not stand at a crooked wooden counter, drinking bad drip coffee while listening to Mrs. Alvarez explain exactly why the city council had never fixed the streetlights. They did not ask Sophie whether she preferred hardcovers or paperbacks, and then remember the answer 20 minutes later. They did not look at Clara as though the room altered when she entered it. At noon, his phone rang. Roman glanced at the screen, and his face closed by degrees. Whatever softness had found its way into him overnight withdrew behind something polished and distant. He stepped toward the front window to answer, voice low. "Yes." A pause. "I said I'm not coming in." Another pause, longer this time. "No." Reschedule the meeting. His tone could have cut glass. He ended the call and turned to find Clara watching him. Problem? Only if the world collapses when billionaires miss appointments. The world seems disappointingly durable. Sophie looked up from behind her book. That was Gideon, wasn't it? Roman did not answer. Sophie's mouth thinned. He hates it when you ignore him. That makes 2 of us. The edge in Roman's voice was new. Clara filed it away without meaning to. Gideon mattered. Enough to darken the room from 3 words alone. Before she could ask, a man in an expensive navy suit strode past the display window and into the shop, as though doors existed mainly to confirm that he could open them. Mid-40s. Immaculate hair. Smile too white to trust. Roman, he said, taking in the store with a brief flicker of distaste. There you are. Sophie went still in the children's corner. Roman's expression chilled further. You weren't invited. Your assistant said you'd become unreachable. The man finally looked at Clara. And this must be the emergency. Something in the way he said emergency made Clara want to throw him into the damp mystery section. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said instead. "Gideon Shaw." His handshake was precise and cool. Old friend of the family. Business partner. Reluctant scavenger of Roman when he disappears from civilization. Roman's voice dropped half a degree. "Watch yourself." Gideon smiled without warmth. "I'm simply surprised. You've ignored 3 board calls and postponed a signing for this?" His gaze swept the shop again. Charming, though economically inefficient. Clara folded her arms. "You should embroider that on a pillow." Sophie coughed to hide a laugh. Gideon's eyes moved between Clara and Roman, calculating. "I see." Roman stepped closer, not touching Clara, not needing to. Outside, but Gideon had already spotted the rolled site plans one of the cleanup workers had set near the register by mistake. He looked at the building directory pinned beside them, then through the front window at the row of brick storefronts stretching down Crescent Lane. Something like satisfaction crossed his face. "Well," he said softly, "this simplifies several conversations." Roman's entire body hardened. Clara felt it before she understood it. "What conversations?" she asked. No one answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. Gideon smiled at her with professional regret. "I'm sure Roman will explain." And just like that, with rain still whispering at the windows and the smell of coffee and damp paper in the air, the fragile warmth of the morning cracked. Clara looked from Gideon to Roman, and for the first time since she had pounded on his door in the storm, uncertainty slid cold and sharp beneath her ribs. Because whatever business Roman Vale had with Crescent Lane, it was not accidental. And judging by the look on his face, it was also not harmless. Gideon left 2 minutes later after a conversation with Roman that took place in the alley in voices too low to hear and tones too dangerous to mistake. When Roman came back inside, Clara was pretending to reorganize a display she had already straightened twice. Sophie had gone upstairs with her blanket and a novel, which Clara suspected was an act of mercy. Roman stopped at the counter. "It's not what you think." Clara kept lining up bookmarks by color. "That depends. Was I thinking my new neighbor heroically helped save my basement for reasons that were entirely human? Or was I thinking my new neighbor also happens to be planning something with my block and forgot to mention it?" He waited a beat before answering. "Both are true." She looked up. He did not flinch from the anger in her face. That made it worse. "What exactly is true?" "There have been discussions about acquiring several properties on Crescent Lane." "Several?" "5 buildings, possibly 7. Her fingers tightened around the cardboard display until it bent. "This building?" Roman did not lie. Yes, a laugh escaped her, thin and incredulous. "That's incredible, Clara." "No, really, full marks for timing. You rescue my books at dawn, and by lunch, I learn your company might be trying to buy the floor out from under me. It hasn't moved past preliminary planning. That's supposed to comfort me? It should matter that I'm telling you now. It would have mattered more yesterday." Something shuddered behind his eyes. Clara saw then that the revelation had not been easy for him, which should have made her kinder. It did not. Her store was still damp. Her bank account was still barely surviving. Her entire adult life existed inside these walls, and Roman Vale had walked into it already carrying information that could ruin her. "My aunt left me this building with debt I'm still paying off," she said. "The reading room upstairs keeps 3 local kids out of trouble after school because their parents work doubles. Mrs. Alvarez uses my back freezer when her bakery compressor acts up. Half the teachers in this neighborhood send students here when they need internet or a quiet place to think. So if you're about to tell me there's some elegant corporate word for demolition that doesn't sound ugly in a boardroom, save it." His jaw flexed. "I wasn't going to say demolition." Redevelopment, then. Revitalization. Optimization. You people always have a word that means someone else gets erased. Roman inhaled slowly. That is not what I want. But it's what your company does. A long silence stretched between them. The cleanup crew moved downstairs. A customer tugged once on the locked front door, read the handwritten "closed for repairs" sign, and walked away. Every sound in the store felt unnaturally loud. Finally, Roman said, "I bought the empty warehouse at the end of the block 6 months ago." Clara blinked. Why? For a data infrastructure project. Secure archive storage. Digital preservation. Office space. The plan expanded. Into homes and businesses. Into adjoining properties that would make the project functional. Functional for whom? His answer came flat. For the board. For investors. For the city, according to the economic projections. And for you? That was the question that landed. Roman looked at her. Truly looked. And for one exposed second she saw how tired he was. Not physically. Somewhere deeper. The kind of exhaustion that calcifies into habit. "I don't know anymore," he said. The honesty disarmed her more than any polished defense could have. Clara set the bent cardboard display down carefully. "Then, maybe you should figure it out before deciding what the rest of us get to lose." She thought he might argue. He did not. He simply nodded once, as if receiving a verdict he had expected. "I'll make sure your building is excluded from any immediate action," he said. "My building isn't the point." I know. But she wasn't sure he did. Roman left soon after, called away by the life Gideon Shaw had come to drag him back into. Sophie lingered a minute longer, standing awkwardly by the register with a novel tucked under one arm. "He doesn't always explain things well," she said. Clara huffed. That might be the understatement of the century. Sophie almost smiled. "He does better than he used to. That's concerning. It should be." Sophie hesitated. "He's not bad. I didn't say he was. You thought it." Clara opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. "I think he's complicated in a way that's probably expensive." That earned her a real smile. Brief, but real. Sophie glanced toward the alley. "For what it's worth, he hasn't missed a board meeting for anyone. Apparently I should embroider that on a pillow, too." "He'll hate that." Good. After Sophie left, the store felt abruptly larger and emptier. Clara spent the afternoon drying pages under fans, answering worried messages from customers, and ignoring the fact that she kept glancing at the alley whenever a car slowed outside. By evening, Mrs. Alvarez had returned with soup, 2 college volunteers had helped move salvageable inventory upstairs, and the city inspector Roman promised had indeed arrived with suspicious speed. Everything practical improved. Nothing internal did. Because now, Clara knew. Roman Vale had not entered her life as a stranger chosen by chance. His orbit had already touched her block, her building, her future. Maybe he had not planned to become the man who held her cat and smiled in her kitchen. Maybe he had not planned to hear why the reading club mattered. But he had still come carrying power she did not. That night, after locking up, Clara carried a basket of damp linens to the narrow roof deck behind her 3rd-floor apartment. The storm had passed, leaving the city scrubbed clean and restless. Streetlights glowed on wet pavement below. Across the alley, lights burned on the top floor of Roman's house. She should have gone inside. Instead, she stayed by the railing, breathing in the cool air, until a sliding glass door opened opposite her and Roman stepped onto his balcony. Neither spoke at first. Then Clara said, "Do billionaires ever sleep?" "Rarely." "Interesting. Bookstore owners don't either. We should start a support group." Roman leaned one forearm on the iron rail. The city lit one side of his face, shadowed the other. It wasn't personal. She gave a short laugh. "That's somehow worse." "I know. The quiet between them held. Finally, he said, "My sister loved old neighborhoods. Independent stores, places with names over the door and owners who remembered birthdays. She would have liked yours." Clara's irritation faltered. "Your sister?" "Ava." He looked out over the rooftops. "She died 4 years ago." Something in the way he said died told Clara not to ask how. "Not yet." "Sophie's mother," she said softly. He nodded. Understanding rearranged a few things at once. The protectiveness, the silence in the house, the teenage girl wrapped in a blanket at dawn, the smile that had looked rusty from disuse. "I'm sorry," Clara said. Roman accepted the words without deflecting them. "After that, I got very good at building efficient things, efficient companies, efficient routines, efficient distance, a humorless exhale. It turns out none of those things are the same as a life." The confession moved through Clara more quietly than she expected. Then, maybe don't bulldoze other people's versions of one. His gaze met hers across the alley. "I said I heard you." She believed he had. She just didn't know if hearing would be enough. What Clara did not know, standing barefoot on a damp roof under a clearing sky, was that Roman had spent the last 4 years mistaking control for survival. He had not smiled because smiling felt like treachery after grief. He had not lingered because attachment looked too much like risk. But the woman across the alley, with wet books and a stubborn mouth, and a talent for saying the exact thing he least wanted to hear, was already making his carefully ordered world feel unstable. And unstable, Roman Vale would soon discover, could be another word for alive. The next 2 weeks rearranged themselves around a pattern neither of them named. Every morning, a black car stopped briefly outside Bennett Books with coffee from the only calf Roman trusted to make tea properly. Every afternoon, Sophie crossed the alley after school and disappeared into the upstairs reading room with homework, headphones, and a stack of novels Clara pretended not to curate specifically for her. 3 evenings out of 5, Roman found some reason to appear. A contractor update, a document requiring signature, a replacement dehumidifier for the storage room, a locksmith he happened to know. By the 2nd week, Clara stopped pretending any of it was accidental. By the 3rd, she had also stopped sending everything back. That should have worried her more. Instead, she found herself waiting for the soft chime of the shop bell at exactly 6:20, when Roman's schedule loosened just enough for 10 borrowed minutes. He never stayed long at first. He would stand near the front counter in a dark suit, loosened by the day, one hand in a coat pocket, and ask how the wall repairs were going, or whether the teen writing workshop needed more folding chairs. Then, he would watch her while she answered, as if some part of him still could not quite believe she spoke to him this way, without filtering herself. Clara had never filtered herself well. "Your tie looks like it's losing a fight," she told him one evening as he stepped in from the cold. "It's called texture. It's called a cry for help. It was selected by a professional. Then you should ask for a refund." He looked down at the silk tie, then back at her. "You're relentless. You say that like it's a flaw." Across the room, Sophie hid her face behind a history textbook. Roman noticed and, to Clara's delight, did not bother pretending he hadn't. The neighborhood noticed too. Mrs. Alvarez began sending extra pastries for the quiet one and the expensive one. Mr. Harlan from the corner hardware store took to nodding solemnly whenever Roman passed, as though welcoming him into some unspoken local apprenticeship and becoming less intolerable. 2 high school girls who attended Clara's writing night nearly fainted when Roman carried in a box of new notebooks one Thursday and set them down without ceremony. "Who is that?" one whispered. Clara answered before she thought better of it. A cautionary tale about emotional repression. Roman heard her. The look he gave her should have blistered paint. Clara smiled sweetly and handed out notebooks, But beneath the banter, real things were changing. Roman came late one Tuesday to find Sophie reading aloud to Mr. Keegan, an elderly widower from the building down the street whose eyesight had deteriorated too badly for him to manage the newspaper on his own. Sophie stumbled over a word, rolled her eyes, corrected herself, and kept going. Mr. Keegan beamed at her as if she had invented language. Roman stood in the doorway longer than usual. Clara, shelving returns nearby, watched his face soften into something unguarded enough to hurt. "She likes it here," he said quietly when Sophie went upstairs for another book. "She likes being useful," Clara said. "People do." Roman's gaze stayed on the stairwell. She barely spoke at school last year. Clara paused. Last year was last year. It's not that simple. No, she agreed. But sometimes it starts with one room where nobody asks you to be impressive. He looked at her then in that focused way he had, the one that made her feel both seen and unsettled. "Is that what this place is for you?" Clara rested her palms on the top of the cart. "It's what I wanted it to be." "And is it?" She almost answered lightly. "Almost. Most days. On bad days it's a leaking building, unpaid invoices, and me negotiating with printers who think exposure is a currency. But yes, mostly, it is." Roman nodded once, as if filing that truth beside all the others he collected about her. The board situation, meanwhile, had not disappeared. It had simply gone quiet, which Clara mistrusted more. Newspaper listings began mentioning strategic redevelopment interest in the district. A city council agenda included a discussion of commercial zoning variances near the warehouse. Gideon Shaw's name surfaced in 2 articles about urban revitalization initiatives. Each item by itself meant little. Together they felt like weather changing far off at sea. When Clara asked Roman directly whether Crescent Lane was still at risk, his answer was always technically reassuring and emotionally maddening. "No decisions have been finalized. You sound like a hostage video. I'm trying to be accurate. Try harder." He never got angry when she pushed. If anything, the pressure seemed to pull honesty out of him in strange, reluctant increments. One night, nearly a month after the storm, Clara found him in the poetry aisle with an open book in his hand. She stopped short. "Are you reading Mary Oliver in secret, Mr. Vale?" He closed the book halfway. "I was checking the paper quality. That is the least convincing lie you've ever told. I've told very few lies. That explains why you're bad at them." He looked down at the page again. "My mother used to read poetry aloud when we were children." Clara leaned against the end-cap shelf. "Used to. She lives in Geneva now." The words carried no bitterness, only distance. "Philanthropy, board memberships, winters somewhere warmer than accountability. And your father?" Roman shut the book. "Gone." "Dead," Clara thought immediately. Then, from the shape of his silence, corrected herself. Not dead. Gone in the more deliberate sense, absent by choice. The distinction mattered. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." He made room for better people. The answer came too quickly to be casual. Before Clara could respond, Sophie thundered down the stairs and announced that the school's winter fundraiser was seeking auction donations, and before you both say no, you should know they already got a signed guitar from someone's washed-up uncle in a band, so the standard is low. Roman blinked. "How is that an argument? It means you can't embarrass yourselves much." Clara laughed. "What exactly are you asking for?" Sophie planted her hands on her hips. "You," she said to Clara, "could donate 1 year of the Young Reader's subscription box because your taste is weird but useful. And you," she said to Roman, "could donate billionaire things." Roman's expression went blank. Define billionaire things. Lunch with a CEO. Courtside tickets, one of your fancy watches. A signed contract promising not to ruin local businesses for at least 12 months. Clara turned away to hide her laughter. Roman astonishingly asked, "Would that last item increase the bidding?" "Massively," Sophie said. For a second, Clara thought the moment might break him. Then the sound came. Small, rusty, incredulous, but unmistakable. A laugh. Not the soft, almost smile from the basement. Not the brief crack of amusement Miso had clawed out of him. A real laugh. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. It was enough. Sophie froze, eyes wide. Clara's breath caught. Roman himself looked faintly startled, as if the sound belonged to a younger version of him and had simply wandered back by mistake. "There," Sophie said quietly, and then louder, because tenderness embarrassed her. "See? Not medically impossible." Roman collected himself with visible effort. "You're both impossible." "Maybe," Clara said, "but not wrong." Later that night, after Sophie had gone home ahead of him, Roman stayed to help Clara move a shipment of donated shelves upstairs. The work was an excuse, and they both knew it. The apartment above the store was modest, full of books stacked in columns beside the couch and framed photographs tucked into every available corner. Roman paused at one near the kitchen lamp. Clara at 16, braces and all, beaming beside a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and bright lipstick. "My aunt," Clara said, setting down her end of the shelf. June Bennett. She believed all respectable arguments should be held over pie. "She sounds formidable." "She was impossible," Clara said, smiling. "And generous, dramatic, stubborn, badly organized, and right about almost everything after enough time had passed to annoy me." Roman studied the photo a moment longer. "You miss her?" "Every day." He nodded as though he understood daily missing in exact units. Clara watched him under the warm apartment light, tie gone, sleeves rolled, expensive watch catching gold at his wrist. The contrast between his life and hers should have shouted. Instead, what she felt most strongly was the ease settling between them when neither tried to control it. "Dangerous," she thought. Then Roman looked up from the photograph and asked, "Why didn't you leave?" The question caught her off guard. "Leave what?" "This neighborhood. The store. The debt. It would have been easier." Clara leaned against the shelf, because easier and better aren't the same. "Because my mother used to bring me here every Saturday and tell me books were cheaper than therapy and nearly as useful. Because Aunt June built this place one bargain bin at a time after her divorce, when everyone expected her to fail. Because some 15-year-old walks in every few weeks, angry at the world, and leaves with a book tucked under their arm and a little less loneliness in their eyes. Take your pick." Roman's gaze held hers. "You make staying sound like courage. Sometimes it is. And sometimes it's just love with nowhere else to go." He did not answer. He crossed to the window instead and looked out toward the alley, where his house stood lit in cool, clean squares across from her warmer chaos. When he turned back, his face had shifted into that unreadable stillness he used when something mattered too much. "I don't want to be your enemy, Clara." She believed that too, but belief was not the same as trust. Then, "Don't act like one," she said. He left 5 minutes later with a good night too quiet to analyze. Clara stood at the window long after his door closed across the alley. Something was happening between them. Something neither sensible nor temporary. She knew it in the way her pulse changed when his car pulled up, in the way Sophie had started looking at her as though Clara might become part of a map she needed, in the way Roman's laugh had lodged itself under Clara's ribs and refused to leave. What Clara did not know, while she washed mugs and restacked invoices and tried not to imagine Roman in her kitchen when he was no longer there, was that Gideon Shaw had already decided she was a problem. Not because of the store, not even because of Crescent Lane, but because Roman Vale, who had once treated attachment like a weakness other people could afford, was beginning to choose where he spent his unguarded hours. And men like Gideon did not lose influence gracefully. They found pressure points. Then, they pressed. The pressure arrived wrapped in bureaucratic language. 3 days before the school fundraiser, Clara found an official notice taped to Bennett Books' front door, citing unresolved structural concerns, outdated accessibility compliance, and emergency permit issues related to the recent flood repairs. It ordered partial closure of the second floor until re-inspection and threatened broader penalties if improvements were not completed within 30 days. Clara read it twice, then a third time, standing in the cold with her key still in the lock. The second floor was the reading room, the workshop space, the tutoring corner, the tiny office where she processed online orders after midnight and paid bills that barely balanced. Closing it even temporarily would gut the programs she ran there. Fixing everything listed on the notice would cost more than she kept in savings on her very best month. By noon, she had called the inspector's office 4 times, left 2 messages, and learned from a tired receptionist that her file had been flagged for rapid compliance review. Which sounded clean and administrative, until Clara noticed the date on the reclassification paperwork, the morning after Gideon Shaw walked into her shop. Coincidence, she told herself. Then she remembered his smile. Not coincidence. Roman arrived just before 1 with his usual coffee and stopped short when he saw the notice spread across the counter beside Clara's calculator, legal pad, and visibly fraying patience. Where did this come from? Oh, good. Maybe you can explain why my reading room has suddenly become a mortal threat to civilization. He read the first page, then the second, his expression darkening by degrees. These violations should have been addressed during the post-flood inspection. They weren't. Because they weren't there? Because apparently the city saved all its concern for the week I made friends with a billionaire. His eyes lifted to hers. This isn't my doing. No, Clara said tightly. But it's adjacent to your orbit, which is beginning to feel like weather again. Roman set the papers down very carefully. I'll make some calls. I don't want a favor. This isn't a favor. If someone accelerated enforcement to pressure you, that's corruption. Clara laughed without humor. Welcome to local business ownership. He moved closer to the counter. Clara. No, listen to me. I know your instinct is to fix things by reaching for the phone and making systems obey. Mine is to survive what they do when nobody important is watching. She swallowed. If I let you swoop in every time, I become exactly what they'll say I am. The woman next to the rich man. The store saved by proximity, not merit. Something hard flashed in his face. Is that what you think I see when I look at you? The directness of it stole a second of her anger. No, she said quietly. That's why this is a problem. Roman exhaled slowly. Then let me help in a way that doesn't erase you. Before Clara could answer, the shop bell rang. Mrs. Alvarez entered, took one look at Clara's face, and set down her pastry box like a woman preparing for war. What happened? Clara passed her the notice. Mrs. Alvarez read 3 lines and barked a laugh sharp enough to cut thread. 30 days? For elevator modifications in a 3-story building with no shaft? Lovely. Perhaps they'd also like her to install a helipad. Roman said, Do you know anyone in the neighborhood association who's dealt with selective enforcement? Mrs. Alvarez glanced between them, instantly understanding more than Clara wanted exposed. Plenty. Why? Because if this is coordinated, I want a record. The next hour became a strategy session fueled by coffee, indignation, and Mrs. Alvarez's spinach pastries. By the end of it, Clara had a list of neighbors who had received similar notices shortly before selling to larger developers, the phone number of a reporter who covered zoning issues, and a deeply annoying sense that Roman was very, very good in a crisis. He did not try to take over. He asked precise questions, wrote things down, and listened when Clara refused shortcuts that would make her look compromised. When she snapped from stress, he let it pass. When she lost track of which invoice matched which contractor, he silently sorted them into categories by date and vendor, and slid them back across the counter in order. "I hate that this is attractive," she muttered. "What is?" "Competence." Roman did not look up from the paperwork. "You should raise your standards." Mrs. Alvarez covered her laugh with a cough. By late afternoon, Sophie arrived from school, absorbed the atmosphere in one glance, and said, "Who are we destroying?" "No one," Roman said. Yet, Clara corrected. Sophie dropped her backpack and joined them at the counter. "If this is because of Gideon, I hope his socks are always damp." Roman's hand stilled on the papers. "You don't need to involve yourself." "I already am involved," Sophie said. "You just like pretending I'm not." The words landed harder than the room allowed for. Clara looked away, suddenly fascinated by the pastry box. Roman's face changed, less like anger, more like a door opening onto an older hurt. Sophie seemed to realize she had gone too far at the same moment. She crossed her arms and stared at the floor. "Whatever." Clara stepped in before the silence could calcify. "Hey. I need someone smart and slightly ruthless to help me write an email to a reporter." "Interested?" Sophie looked up, wary and grateful at once. "Slightly ruthless? Fine. Deeply." That got a ghost of a smile from the girl and a soft, unreadable look from Roman. After closing, the three of them ate takeout noodles on the floor of the second-story reading room because the tables were stacked for inspection photos. Rain tapped gently at the repaired windows. The city glowed beyond the glass. Clara read out possible subject lines for the reporter email, while Sophie rejected each one with the severity of a tiny editor. "Too dramatic." "It is dramatic." "Exactly. Which means you can't sound like it." Roman listened, occasionally offering one-line suggestions so practical they irritated Clara by being useful. "Use dates." "I am using dates." "Use fewer adjectives." "I need those adjectives." "You do not." "You're emotionally anti-adjective. And yet I remain understandable." "Debatable." Sophie grinned into her noodles. For one suspended stretch of time, the permits and pressure and threat outside the room receded. Clara felt it sharply, almost painfully, the shape of an ordinary evening that should not have become precious so quickly. Roman on the floor in a perfectly cut black coat, tie abandoned, eating takeout from a paper carton because Sophie had insisted there was no point being rich if you couldn't occasionally ignore furniture. Sophie arguing about email punctuation with the intensity of a trial lawyer. Miso asleep on Roman's shoe like he had always belonged there. It looked too much like something that could be lost. Later, after Sophie went upstairs to choose a book for Mr. Keegan, Roman stayed behind while Clara stacked the empty cartons. "You were right," he said. Clara glanced over. "About?" "Selective enforcement. I had someone discreet review the filing history. Your case was escalated through a private office tied to a consultancy Gideon uses for civic outreach." Her stomach dropped. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But enough to know, yes." She sat back on her heels. "Why?" Roman's mouth flattened. "Because pressure is cheaper than negotiation. If businesses panic, they sell. And if I panic? I don't think you do." Clara looked at him. "You say that like you admire it." "I do." The answer came too simply to dismiss. Something warmer and more dangerous rushed in behind it. Clara stood too fast, carton in hand. "You can't keep saying things like that." His gaze lifted, steady. "Why not?" "Because the situation is already complicated." "It was complicated the night you showed up at my door looking like a shipwreck with opinions." Despite herself, she laughed. "That is an outrageous description. It's accurate." "No, accurate would be resourceful local bookseller heroically preserving literature in extreme conditions." Roman took one step closer. "Fine. Resourceful local bookseller heroically preserving literature in extreme conditions." The room grew smaller. Clara could hear the rain again, the soft thud of Sophie moving upstairs, the impossible steadiness of Roman's breathing. He was close enough now that she could see the tiny white scar near his chin she had not noticed before. Close enough that the air between them felt chosen. "Roman," she said, and his name came out quieter than intended. He looked at her mouth. That was when the front door downstairs banged open. They jumped apart at once. A voice carried upward from the store, male and loud and unfamiliar. "Bennett? You in here?" Clara closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Roman's expression shuddered so fast it almost felt rehearsed. They went downstairs to find a local councilman Clara had been trying to avoid for months, standing beneath the register lamp, with two men in expensive coats, and a smile meant for cameras. He launched into a speech about community partnerships and modernizing historic districts before Clara had fully reached the bottom step. Roman stood beside her, once again, all polished distance. By the time the men left 10 minutes later, Clara had 3 glossy brochures for a revitalized Crescent Lane corridor, a request for a meeting with the council office, and a new certainty hardening in her bones. This was not random pressure anymore. It was a campaign. And whether Roman wanted to be or not, he stood in the center of it. What Clara did not know, watching the councilman's car disappear into traffic while Roman's face returned to stone beside her, was that Gideon had made his next move hours earlier. A leak had been sent to a business columnist. A photograph had been cued for publication. And by morning, Clara Bennett would learn exactly how ruthless powerful men became when persuasion failed and scandal offered a cleaner tool. The photo hit just after 7. Clara saw it first because Mrs. Alvarez texted the link with 3 furious emojis and the message, "I will personally set fire to a newspaper." The article sat behind a tasteful headline about civic renewal and private influence, but the image did the real work. It showed Roman on the floor of the reading room 2 nights earlier, tie undone, leaning toward Clara over a spread of permit notices. Clara was laughing at something outside the frame. Roman was looking at her with an expression no stranger would mistake. The article called her a local business owner under consideration for favorable redevelopment terms. It suggested an undisclosed personal relationship with the developer whose companies held interests in the district. It did not outright accuse her of trading access for protection. It did not need to. The implication was cleaner than any lie. By 8:30, 3 customers had canceled standing orders until things became clearer. By 9, someone had scrawled "gold digger" in black marker on the side alley brick. By 10, the reporter Clara had contacted about zoning abuse emailed to ask whether she wanted to comment on the conflict of interest angle. Clara read the message 3 times before fury burned through humiliation hard enough to keep her upright. When Roman arrived, she was on a step stool scrubbing at the alley wall with solvent and a wire brush. The word had smeared into a wider stain, which somehow made it until it looked less like an accusation and more like a wound. Roman took the brush gently from her hand before the metal bristle snapped. "Come inside." "No." "Clara." I said no. She straightened so quickly she nearly missed the step stool rung. Solvent stung the raw skin across her knuckles. "You don't get to show up calm. Not today." He did not reach for her again. That, somehow, made it worse. He simply stood there in a dark coat with rain still caught in his hair, looking at the word on the wall as if he could reverse the last 12 hours by force of will. "I didn't know the article was coming," he said. "I believe you." His eyes lifted to hers, surprised by the answer. "That doesn't help," Clara went on. "I also believe a tiger doesn't personally schedule every hunt. It still matters that I'm standing in its territory." A muscle worked in his jaw. This was Gideon. Probably. Maybe. One of his consultants. A councilman with a hobby. A columnist who likes implication better than truth. Pick any of them. The point is that they had something to use, because you and I, she broke off, furious at herself for not having a cleaner word. Because this became visible. Roman looked past her shoulder into the alley, where a few neighbors were pretending not to watch from their windows. His voice dropped. Then, let me answer it publicly. With what? A statement from your office saying the local bookseller is very honorable and absolutely not sleeping her way through a zoning dispute? He flinched. Tiny. Real. Clara hated that she saw it. I would never phrase it that way. Your restraint is inspiring. He took a breath, then another, visibly mastering whatever came easiest to him when the ground shifted. Control. Stillness. Distance. What do you need from me right now? The question should have softened her. Instead, it cracked something open. I need my life not to become a lesson in what happens when powerful people notice you, she said. I need customers to stop looking at me like they're trying to decide what I cost. I need this block not to become a cautionary tale about integrity versus capital. And I need you to understand that even if you are not the one holding the knife, your hand is on the room. Silence. Traffic hissed at the far end of the street. Somewhere, a delivery truck banged shut. Roman's face had gone almost unnaturally calm. I understand, he said at last. No, Clara said quietly. I think you're beginning to. She took the brush back from him, set it down on the stoop, and stepped around him toward the shop door. He moved aside immediately. Of course he did. He was never the kind of man who blocked a path. He was the kind who altered all the roads around it. Clara, he said before she could go in. She stopped with her hand on the knob, but didn't turn. I'm going to fix what I can. That, she said without looking back, is exactly what frightens me. Inside, the store smelled of wet coats, old paper, and bruised pride. Mrs. Alvarez was behind the register with the expression of a woman prepared to stab rumor in the eye. Sophie stood near the front display, pale with contained fury. She must have come in through the alley and seen the graffiti before Roman arrived. The protective look she shot Clara was so sharp and immediate that it nearly undid her. I told the after-school group not to come up yet, Sophie said. I thought maybe you'd want a minute. Clara swallowed. Thank you. Mrs. Alvarez slapped the folded newspaper on the counter. I have called 3 people and frightened 2 of them. The third is a printer's widow who knows everyone at the Chronicle and says the columnist has always confused gossip with analysis. That's oddly comforting. It is meant to be. Sophie folded her arms. He did this because he wants Uncle Roman to back off. Clara gave her a tired look. You can say his name. It won't summon him like a demon, unfortunately. Sophie's mouth twitched, but only briefly. He thinks if he makes you look opportunistic, then anything you say about the permits sounds personal instead of true. Which, Clara thought grimly, was exactly correct. By noon, the story had spread as far as the neighborhood school chat, the bakery line, and every social media account in a 5-mile radius dedicated to pretending civic corruption was a personality. Clara answered no messages. She stocked shelves with mechanical precision, then restocked them after putting half the returns in the wrong places. Roman did not come back. At 1:30, a woman in a camel coat and sensible heels entered the shop carrying a notebook instead of a phone. Mid-30s. Dark hair twisted into a low knot. Intelligent eyes that looked as if they had once missed nothing and then chosen to miss less. Clara Bennett? She asked. Clara braced. Depends who's asking. Leah Moreno. City Ledger. She held up a press card. I'm the reporter you emailed about the permit escalation. Mrs. Alvarez materialized from the back with 2 coffees and the expression of a bouncer evaluating moral character. I'm staying. Leah glanced at the article on the counter, then at the faint dark smudge visible through the alley door window. Understanding sharpened her face. I can imagine this is a bad time. That makes one of us, Clara said. Leah didn't smile. The column this morning was lazy, which is useful for me because lazy people leave seams. That got Clara's attention. Leah opened her notebook. I've spent the last 2 hours looking at property notices issued on Crescent Lane over the past 18 months. Your building isn't the only one that got a sudden conscience from the city after resisting a purchase offer. Mrs. Alvarez leaned in. I said it. You did, Clara admitted. Leah nodded. There's a pattern. Small businesses receive enforcement notices after preliminary acquisition conversations stall. Same consultancy involved in 3 of the filing chains. Same counsel liaison copied twice. I can't print corruption without documents, but I can print timing, overlap, and motive. And the article about me? Clara asked. Leah's mouth flattened. That's there to muddy the water before I do. A beat passed. Then Clara said, All right. Mrs. Alvarez shot her a quick glance. All right? Leah repeated. I'll talk, Clara said. On the record. But not about my personal life. About the permits, the pressure, and the fact that independent businesses seem to become public safety concerns only when wealth wants a cleaner map. Leah uncapped her pen. That I can use. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Clara gave dates, copies of notices, photographs from the flood inspection, names of neighbors who had received suspiciously timed citations, and one very pointed explanation of why the reading room upstairs mattered to more people than a spreadsheet would ever count. She did not mention Roman, except where his company's proposed interests were already a matter of public record. She did not mention the alley, the coffee, the laugh, or the way his hand had once settled at her elbow in a flooded basement, as if steadying her had not required thought. By the end, Leah closed the notebook and said, Whatever else is happening, this part is real. That matters. Clara almost laughed. Apparently reality is having a bad week. It usually does before someone bothers to print it. After Leah left, the afternoon brought a different kind of traffic. Mr. Keegan arrived with a stack of petitions from the senior center demanding the reading room remain open. 2 teachers from the elementary school dropped off a letter signed by parents who used the bookstore tutoring corner. A florist from the next block sent white chrysanthemums with a note that read, For the record, your shelves have more integrity than the council. By 5, Clara's humiliation had not vanished, but it had been forced to make space for something sturdier. People knew her. That had always been the point of staying. Roman's car stopped outside just after closing. Clara saw it through the glass and kept counting the register. Mrs. Alvarez, who had appointed herself emotional customs officer, watched both of them and muttered, If he is here to be noble, I am charging admission. He entered quietly. No entourage. No umbrella held over his head by anyone else. Sophie stood behind him in her school blazer, having apparently insisted on coming. Her face was set. I told him if he said one stupid thing, I was leaving with the cat, she announced. An excellent policy, Clara said. Roman's gaze moved over her as if checking for visible damage and finding too much anyway. I've removed every one of my companies from active negotiation on Crescent Lane pending an independent review. Clara said nothing. I also requested an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Mrs. Alvarez snorted. Requested? Darling? With your face, you summoned one. A faint line appeared between Roman's brows. Probably. Sophie folded her arms tighter. Tell her the rest. Roman reached into his coat and set a slim file on the counter. The photograph in the column came from a private security contractor hired through one of Gideon's shell consultancies. My internal review found the invoice chain. Clara stared. You have proof? Enough to force disclosure. Not enough yet to prosecute. Mrs. Alvarez looked disappointed by the last part. Roman went on. I also know the permit escalations were routed through the same consultancy. Leah Moreno will have corroboration from a source in the records office within the hour. Clara blinked. You gave it to her? I gave it to a lawyer who gave it to a compliance officer who strongly believes in leaving documents where journalists can legally find them. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. Almost. Roman's expression did not change. I am not asking for gratitude. Good. I am asking you not to mistake silence for indifference. That struck too close. Clara set the till tray down. Then stop going silent at the exact moments when power matters most. Something flashed across his face. Anger, maybe, but aimed inward. Sophie looked between them with the exhausted patience of a teenager whose adults were underperforming. You two are impossible, she declared. And for the record, if either of you says it's complicated again, I'm moving to Iceland. Mrs. Alvarez patted her shoulder. Take me with you. The absurdity cracked the tension just enough to let everyone breathe. Roman rested his fingertips on the file. Tomorrow's board meeting decides whether Gideon keeps any influence over this project. If I fail, he'll push harder. If you fail, Clara said, he'll push harder at you. He's already trying to. Roman's gaze held hers. I know. And if you win, then the project as it exists ends. The store went very quiet. You'd do that? Clara asked before she could stop herself. His answer was immediate. Yes. For me? No. He paused. For what should have been obvious before I met you. That was worse. Somehow. Better. More dangerous. Clara looked away first. Sophie, perhaps sensing that another second of direct eye contact might ignite half the room, dragged the petition stack toward herself. Right. So tomorrow I'm skipping first period. No, Roman and Clara said together. Sophie lifted a brow. Wow. Co-parenting already. Disturbing. Mrs. Alvarez cackled. Even Roman's mouth betrayed him for a fraction of a second. Later, when the store was locked and Sophie had gone upstairs to finish homework in the reading room, Clara found Roman standing alone in the alley beneath the cleaned brick wall. The black smear where the word had been was still visible if you knew what had been there. The streetlights turned the damp pavement bronze. You didn't have to wait, she said. He turned. I know. Then why are you here? His hands stayed in his coat pockets. Because if tomorrow goes badly, I wanted one honest minute before the next performance begins. Clara stepped down from the stoop. The alley felt narrower than ever. That sounds ominous. It's a boardroom. Ominous is business casual. She laughed softly despite herself. Roman watched the sound happen, and something in him eased. I have been very good for a long time at becoming whatever a room requires. Efficient. Controlled. Unsurprising. His voice lowered. You are the first thing in years that has made that feel unbearable. The words settled between them with nowhere to go but deeper. Roman, she said, because there were no useful sentences after that. I know the timing is terrible. Spectacularly. I know this may sound like pressure. It does. His eyes closed briefly. Then let me say the part that matters, and you can be angry afterward. I should have told you sooner about the project. I should have protected you sooner from Gideon. I should have understood sooner that helping you was never the dangerous part. He looked at her again, stripped of polish in a way she had only glimpsed at 2 a.m, and on a roof under clearing skies. The dangerous part was how quickly you began to matter. Clara's pulse went unsteady. The alley held its breath. And then, because she was Clara, and because truth had always cost less than pretending in the long run, she said, You matter to me too. That's why I'm furious. 1,000 things moved across his face, and resolved into one quiet, astonished stillness. He took half a step forward. Stopped. May I? No one had ever made 3 letters sound that careful. Clara nodded once. His hand rose to her cheek as if he had rehearsed restraint his entire life for this exact touch. Warm fingers. Cool night. His thumb barely brushed the edge of her jaw before his mouth found hers. The kiss was not explosive. It was worse. It was patient, reverent, and ruinously precise, as though he understood the value of measured things and had finally chosen to spend one. Clara's hand curled in the front of his coat before she realized she was moving. He kissed her once, then again, deeper now, all the withheld feeling in him turning from distance into focus. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing like the alley had tilted. From the 3rd-floor roof deck above them, a voice called down with perfect timing. "If either of you pretends that didn't happen," Sophie shouted, "I will absolutely move to Iceland." Clara dropped her forehead to Roman's shoulder and laughed helplessly. Roman, to his credit, laughed too. It was the sound that carried Clara through the next day. The board meeting began at 9 and leaked into headlines by 10:30. Clara did not attend. She opened the store instead, because some acts of resistance were practical. Mrs. Alvarez occupied the armchair near the register like a revolutionary ant. Sophie sat at the children's table pretending to do math homework while checking her phone every 30 seconds. Leah Moreno arrived at 11 with a draft alert on her screen and asked if she could wait for comment. By then, the whole neighborhood seemed to understand that something decisive was happening somewhere expensive and far away that would determine whether their block remained itself. At 11:20, Sophie's phone rang. She looked at the screen, then at Clara. "It's him." "Answer." Sophie put it on speaker without warning. Roman's voice came through, clipped by movement, as if he were walking fast. "Sophie? I'm here." A beat. "Is Clara with you?" "Yes." More movement. A door. Then silence sharp enough to mean privacy. "It's done," he said. No one in the store breathed. Roman continued. "Gideon is out." 2 board members resigned rather than defend the procurement chain. The redevelopment plan for Crescent Lane has been formally terminated. Effective immediately, all acquisition activity is frozen pending independent audit. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself. Blessed Mother. Clara gripped the edge of the counter. "And you?" A pause she would remember for a long time. "I resigned as acting project lead before anyone could call it strategy." Sophie's head snapped up. "You what?" "It was necessary." "For optics?" Clara asked. "For honesty." The words settled warm and dangerous through her. He went on. "I'm on my way there now. Leah Moreno will have the documents within minutes. I'd rather tell you in person what comes next." "What comes next?" Sophie repeated. Roman exhaled, and Clara could hear the fatigue in it now. "The cost. I'm hoping you don't both hate me by the time I arrive." "We'll assess," Sophie said briskly, though her eyes were bright. Roman came in 12 minutes later to a full shop. Leah had already published. So had 3 other outlets. The story spread faster than Scandal ever did, because this time documents supported the drama. Consulting invoices, escalated permit chains, the surveillance payment tied to the leaked photograph. One council aide's beautifully self-incriminating message about softening local resistance through reputational ambiguity. Gideon Shaw's name was everywhere, usually beside the word pressure. Roman stood just inside the door, while customers and neighbors pretended not to stare. For once, he looked like a man who had lost something heavy and found air in the space it left. Tired, yes. More open than Clara had ever seen him. He crossed the shop toward her, each step making the room feel a little less noisy. Leah clicked off her phone recorder. For what it's worth, that was an elegant demolition. Roman's mouth twitched. "I was advised to use fewer adjectives." Clara stared at him. You really resigned? I really did. Why? He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and took out a folded document. Not a contract. Not a purchase agreement. An architectural rendering, matte and simple, the kind planners used when they wanted a future to look gentle before it became expensive. He set it on the counter between them. Clara looked down. It showed the warehouse at the end of Crescent Lane restored, not enlarged. Ground floor public reading hall. Community archive. Classrooms. Digital media lab. Rooftop garden. On the corner nearest the street, a modest plaque labeled Bennett Community Center Partnership Proposal. She looked up sharply. Roman's voice was low enough for only those closest to hear. This is the version Ava wanted when we first discussed doing something with the warehouse before she died. Public space. Preservation. Local control. I let that plan become something colder after she was gone, because efficiency looked easier than grief. His eyes did not leave Clara's. I'm done calling that wisdom. The shop had gone utterly still. I don't understand, Clara said. It means, Roman said, that if the neighborhood wants it, I will fund the restoration of the warehouse into a community trust with independent local governance. No acquisitions. No forced sales. No ownership transfer of existing homes or businesses. Bennett Books remains Bennett Books. A beat. And if the neighborhood doesn't want anything from me, I will walk away and accept that too. Mrs. Alvarez whispered something in Spanish that sounded impressed and suspicious at the same time. Clara looked back at the rendering. Classrooms. Archives. Teen space. Event hall. The kind of place Aunt June would have argued about loudly and then helped paint herself. You're offering this because of me, she said quietly. I'm offering this because you reminded me what institutions are for, he replied. The fact that it also matters to me what you think is no longer something I intend to hide. There it was, not a declaration hurled dramatically across a ballroom. Something harder. Cleaner. Chosen in daylight. Sophie stepped between them, looked at the rendering and said, if there isn't a proper teen room with terrible beanbags, I'm vetoing the entire thing. The tension broke like glass under warmth. Laughter moved through the shop in a relieved wave. Clara's eyes burned unexpectedly. I'm not going to let you buy absolution. Roman's answer was immediate. Good. I mean it. So do I. She searched his face for performance and found none. Only exhaustion, hope, and the terrible steadiness of a man who had finally stopped outsourcing his courage. Then if this happens, she said, it happens with public meetings, neighborhood votes, and Mrs. Alvarez being legally permitted to terrorize your consultants. Mrs. Alvarez lifted a hand. I was born ready. Roman gave a small nod. Agreed. And the trust board includes educators, local owners, one teen representative, Sophie pointed at herself. Correct. And no secret clauses written by men who think revitalization means better coffee and fewer poor people. Also agreed. Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the storm. All right. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a door opening. Roman seemed to understand the distinction perfectly. All right, he echoed. The next month belonged to meetings. Public, loud, messy, necessary meetings. Clara moderated the first one because no one else could make the room quiet and furious at the same time. Mrs. Alvarez interrogated 2 architects into visible repentance over bathroom placement. Mr. Keegan demanded larger print signage in every proposal. Sophie designed a survey for neighborhood teenagers and bullied adults into taking it seriously. Leah Moreno attended with the patient interest of a reporter who had accidentally wandered into a better story than the one she came for. Roman came to every session. Not at the front. Not at the center. He sat in the 3rd row, answered questions when asked, accepted criticism without rebuttal, and wrote things down. The neighborhood watched him the way people watch weather that once broke windows and now arrives carrying lumber. Useful, possibly sincere, not yet fully trusted. Clara watched him too. She watched him kneel in a wool coat to help a 7-year-old find a dropped marker, watched him listen while a retired school librarian explained why archives were wasted on people who loved aesthetic more than access. Watched him sit through 3 straight hours of debate about elevator placement without once checking out of the room. Watched him laugh, more often now, still unexpectedly, as if joy had to relearn the route. Trust did not return all at once. It arrived in layers. The first layer was action. The project documentation transferred to an independent legal team. The warehouse funding moved into a restricted trust that Roman could not reclaim at whim. Gideon Shaw quietly left 2 boards and loudly hired lawyers. The counsel aide resigned before being asked. The columnist who wrote the original piece published a correction that read like it had been dragged out through broken glass. The second layer was Sophie. She spent more evenings at Clara's apartment, ostensibly for tutoring, and actually because the bookstore had become her safest geography. She told Clara about panic attacks she called glitches because medical language felt too exposed. Clara told her about surviving debt one spreadsheet and one ridiculous bakery tab at a time. Roman never interfered, though once Clara walked into the kitchen and found him standing very still while Sophie argued passionately that fantasy novels counted as emotional preparedness. The look on his face was half wonder, half grief, like he was watching life regrow in terrain he had written off as scorched. The third layer was quieter. It lived in the evenings after committee meetings, when Roman would stay to stack chairs. In the cups of tea he began making, without asking where she kept anything. In the way he learned which lamp in Clara's apartment buzzed when it was tired, and changed the bulb before she noticed. In the night he found her asleep at the kitchen table over grant applications, tucked a blanket around her shoulders, and then stood there long enough that she woke just enough to catch the tenderness before he smoothed it into composure. "You know," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "For someone who avoided attachment like a tax audit, you're getting suspiciously domestic." His mouth curved. "You're awake." "Unfortunately for your reputation," he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Go to bed, Clara." Bossy, exhausted, she caught his wrist before he could pull back. "Stay?" The word surprised both of them. Roman's gaze searched hers carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm sure about wanting you here." So he stayed. Not in the dramatic sense, not with declarations flung at the moon. He simply sat at the table while she finished the grant application, then followed her to the couch when she curled beneath the blanket and made room without asking. They fell asleep there sometime after midnight, Clara with her feet tucked under his leg, and Roman startling awake once at 3, as though peace had become a noise he needed to identify before trusting. By winter's first hard frost, the warehouse trust had a name, Ava House Community Center, after Sophie asked one brutal, obvious question at a planning meeting. If this is the good version Uncle Roman forgot how to build, why are we pretending it belongs to anything else? No one had a better answer. The naming hit Roman harder than he expected. Clara knew because he went very still when the vote passed, and only exhaled when Sophie slipped her hand into his for half a second under the table. He looked at Clara across the room then, eyes bright in a way he would once have turned from, and she loved him a little more for not doing it now. She knew it was love before she said it. Knew it in the shape of her days, bending naturally around his presence. In how his silences no longer felt like absences, but specific languages she had learned to hear. In the way he asked for her opinion before making choices that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with becoming a man who wanted witness, not just results. in how he looked at Sophie when she laughed with her whole face, and how he no longer seemed frightened by the fact that he could lose people, because he had accepted, finally, that the alternative was not safety. It was emptiness, she told him on a Tuesday so ordinary it became sacred. The bookstore was closed. Snow pressed soft against the windows. They were on the roof deck wrapped in blankets, sharing a slice of bakery pie Mrs. Alvarez insisted was structurally important to winter morale. Across the alley, lights glowed in Roman's house. Below them, the block slept under white and gold. Roman was saying something about a donor agreement when Clara interrupted. "I love you." He stopped. Not dramatically, not with theatrical surprise, just stopped, as if every moving part in him had received one command at once and obeyed. Clara felt suddenly, absurdly calm. "I know this is not strategic timing. I know you were in the middle of a sentence about restricted funds. But I'm tired of pretending it's implied." Roman set the plate aside very carefully. The city seemed to withdraw around them. "Say it again," he said, and his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. She smiled. "I love you." He closed his eyes once, briefly, like a man hit cleanly by truth he had wanted and feared in equal measure. When he looked at her again, there was nothing distant left in him. "Clara Bennett," he said softly, "I loved you before I had any right to. I think I began in that basement somewhere between the broken window and the cat assault. I was only arrogant enough to believe I could keep calling it concern." His hand came up to cradle the side of her neck, warm despite the cold air. "I love you. I love your impossible bookstore, your terrifying honesty, your habit of feeding everyone else before yourself, and the way you make every room I enter tell the truth." She laughed, because crying would have made the pie situation unmanageable. Then she kissed him, and the snow kept falling, and for once the future did not feel like a threat requiring management. It felt like weather worth stepping into. By spring, Ava House opened its first floor. The reading hall filled before noon. Children ran between the shelves with the bright irresponsibility of being wanted. Teenagers occupied the media lab as if they had personally invented it. Mr. Keegan held court in the sunlight near the large print section. Mrs. Alvarez declared the event under-catered and solved the problem with 7 trays of food. Leah Moreno wrote a piece so unexpectedly tender that half the city pretended to have always valued neighborhood institutions. Gideon Shaw sent no flowers. Bennett Books remained exactly where it belonged, its sign freshly repainted, but its soul unchanged. The reading room upstairs reopened with better lighting, sturdier shelves, and a coffee stain on one corner desk Sophie insisted should remain because sanitized spaces have no memory. Clara took over as chair of the trust board after trying unsuccessfully to refuse. Roman joined only as a non-voting advisor, with strict instructions not to billionaire the place into absurdity. He mostly obeyed. On the morning of the grand opening, Clara stood outside the bookstore tying blue ribbon around a basket of flyers when she heard laughter behind her. Real laughter. Easy, familiar now. She turned. Roman was in shirt sleeves carrying a box of children's books toward Ava House, while Sophie walked beside him, reading the titles aloud in a terrible dramatic voice. Miso sat in the bookstore window like a petty orange emperor. The whole block was awake. Alive. Still itself. Roman saw Clara watching and came toward her, sunlight on his face, no armor left that she had not already learned how to touch. "What?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling. "Nothing. Just thinking the neighborhood was right. That's a dangerous habit. That it needed this," she said, "and that it was missing your smile." He looked almost embarrassed, which on Roman Vale read as mortal vulnerability. "I smile. You do now." He leaned down and kissed her quickly, warmly, in full view of the street. Across the sidewalk, Mrs. Alvarez made a triumphant noise as if collecting on a prophecy. Sophie passed them carrying the box and said, "Please keep the public romance to a medically tolerable level. We have an opening in 10 minutes. Roman straightened. "You say romance like it's contagious." "It is," Sophie replied, "and this neighborhood already has enough excitement." Clara laughed and took one side of the box from her. The three of them crossed the street together toward the new center, toward the noise and warmth and ordinary chaos waiting inside. Years later, people would still tell the story badly at first. They would say the cold billionaire fell for the bookstore owner next door. They would say she changed him. They would say he saved her shop. Those versions were simpler. Cleaner, easier to repeat over coffee or at the bakery counter. The truer version was less convenient and much better. A storm broke a window. A woman who had spent her life choosing people over ease knocked on the wrong door at the perfect hour. A man who had mistaken distance for strength opened it. And because neither of them turned away after seeing the damage the other carried, an entire block kept its name. A teenage girl got back a future she could trust. A dead sister's better idea became brick and light. And a man who had not smiled in years learned that love was not the opposite of grief. It was what made grief worth surviving. And on certain winter nights, when rain tapped softly at the repaired glass, and the lights of Bennett books glowed gold across the alley, Roman Vale would still pause at Clara's door before going in. Just for a second. Just long enough to remember the first knock. Then he would smile and open it anyway.